Welcome to Sagas and Sass Season 4, brought to you by Geek Saga Entertainment. I'm Tara, along with fellow host Jonathan, and this episode will cover parts 1 and 2 of Red Rising, which is the first book in Pierce Brown's Red Rising saga.
If you're watching live, join us in the chat, or after the fact, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Sagas and Sass, or email us at sagasandsass@gmail.com to continue the conversation. Additionally, please note that the views expressed in this show are those of the hosts as individuals and do not necessarily represent the show as a whole.
And don't forget that we now have a Patreon with 10 tiers ranging from $1 a month to $40 a month. It offers tons of ways to support us and receive some great perks in return. You can check it out at patreon.com/geeksaga_entertainment.
There's nothing like diving into a new series, and with Red Rising, we're hell diving in with Darrow as he rides a claw drill deep below the surface of Mars, mining the helium-3 that is used to terraform Mars. Darrow is a red, one of the many colors in this far future society, described by the Sovereign as brave pioneers, strongest of the human breed, who sacrifice to pave the way for other colors by toiling to make Mars ready for them. As the Hell Diver of Lycos, Darrow is a cocksure teen bent on winning the laurel for his clan, the Lambdas. The Gammas always win the laurel, the prize that is supposedly based on mining the most helium-3, and which gets them extra food, medicine, and other treats. All thing that Darrow wants for his wife, Io, who is clearly the light of his life. So Darrow kinda stupidly believes that taking a huge risk during his mining shift and making a huge helium-3 pull will finally allow Lambda to win the laurel. Although the older, wiser man on his crew and even his young wife all know better. The laurel once again goes to Gamma, and as a consolation prize, Io takes Darrow to visit a secret garden used by the Greys who guard the mining colony. While they have a wonderful night together, making love under the stars, it turns out to be their last night. The Greys catch them exiting the garden, and both Darrow and Io are subjected to a lashing. Only Io interrupts hers by singing a forbidden song, which turns her already terrible punishment into a death sentence. Forced to watch his wife hang, Darrow decides he wants to follow her to the grave. The law says that criminals can't be buried. Their bodies hang as a warning to the township until the flesh has rotted away, and then their bones are removed and ground to dust. But Darrow cuts Io's body down and buries her in the garden, and is then subjected to his own hanging.
Now, luckily for Darrow, his uncle, Neril, gave him a special drink prior to the hanging to slow his heartbeat, faked pulling his feet, which is necessary to relieve suffering in Mars's low gravity, and then was able to turn off the security cameras to drag Darrow down and bury him. So while Darrow wakes up in a grave, he does in fact wake up and is immediately picked up by a red woman named Harmony and brought to Dancer, who is also a red and clearly high up in the Sons of Ares chain of command. Who are the Sons of Ares, you ask? Why, they're the so-called terrorist group that has been blamed for bombings, but who also hacked the HC, which is essentially the society's version of Fox News, to broadcast Io's martyrdom. And now they want to recruit Darrow. He's more than a little hesitant at first, but then Dancer takes Darrow on a long elevator ride and into a penthouse with a view of the city. Because it turns out that Mars has been habitable for hundreds of years. And, why would anyone tell the Reds who slave away mining the helium-3 that the society needs for fuel that they've been lied to all this time? Anyway, seeing the final product of his people's labors leads to Darrow agreeing to help the Sons of Ares, and his help comes in the form of giving up his entire self, physically at least, because Dancer hires a violet named Mickey to make Darrow a gold. This process is called carving, and Darrow pretty much only survives it because a pit viper bite made his heart stronger than most, as carving involves rebuilding his entire body again, even down to his bone density. He's also fed hundreds of years of history, literature, science, and more while he sleeps, and eventually a pink named Mateo is brought in to train him in dance, etiquette, and speech. Finally, Darrow is as ready as he'll ever be to take the admittance test for the Gold Institute on Mars. He does so well that the Board of Quality Control pays him a visit, but he fools them as well, and so his real mission finally begins. On his way to the Institute, he shares a shuttle with a rude little gold named Severo and Julian, who happens to be the brother of a young man named Cassius that Darrow had a meet cute with on testing day. They're the sons of an imperator, aka a really important dude. As it turns out, once at the Institute, the students are sorted into houses, and Darrow ends up in House Mars along with Severo, Julian, and Cassius, among others. A welcome feast is held, and everyone goes to sleep well fed and presumably excited for the future until they're all dragged out of their beds, stripped naked, beaten, and then tossed two to a room and told only one of them can come out alive. Unfortunately for Julian, he's paired with Darrow, and while Darrow hates what he has to do, he also understands that he has no choice. He kills the other boy, crying as he does so, and is left cradling the body of this kind person and finally beginning to understand what the Institute really is: a culling ground. Dun dun dun! Okay, so part one of Red Rising is titled Slave. And I just want to start the discussion out with a quote, and I have several passages that I'm probably going to, if not read outright, then actually, definitely reference throughout our discussion. But the quote I'm going to start with is: Eo says the laurel is the carrot the society dangles, always just far enough beyond our grasp, just enough so we know how short we really are and how little we can do about it. We're supposed to be pioneers. Eo calls us slaves. I think I just think we never try hard enough, never take the big risks because of the old men. So there's several things that we can unpack from this passage. And one of them is, just to start, he makes the comment how short we really are. And I think that's like, not the best segue, but an okay segue into the heights of the society. Because as we mentioned several times in the summary, there are colors that make up everything. And at the very bottom are the reds, or in this case, very specifically, I think we can refer to them as low reds, because there are also higher up reds that actually know that the terraforming is complete and work as sort of servants and whatnot. But at the top is the golds, obviously, and the height difference between them, if you look it up, it's hard to describe, but the golds are described as like, I can't remember if it's I think it's 7 feet tall or something like that.
Yeah, most of the men seem to be around 6'10" to 7'2",
Yeah.
and the women are even like 6'6". Usually, there are exceptions that we'll talk about later, but they,
Yeah, yeah. And but it's, I mean, the height difference is just absolutely, to be honest, it's kind of over the top, and it's one of those things where, as much as they talk about making this into some sort of series, if if fans are gonna want to see that height difference, they're probably going to have to do it as an animated show. Because there are also obsidians, which we meet only briefly in the first part of this book, when they are actually there with the arch governor of Mars. Oh my gosh, whose name is escaping me now? Nero out Augustus. He has obsidian guards with him, and obsidians are even bigger than golds usually. But there's plenty of colors, and we've only met a few of them officially, at least by name, as of this point. So there's reds at the bottom. Just above them are browns, who are, like I said, browns are basically servants. There's obsidians and pinks. Obsidians are kind of warmongering. They can be guards, but they're usually used as higher ups, like soldiers, really important soldiers. And then there's pinks, who are essentially sex slaves.
yeah.
The grays are basic guards, right?
Yeah, I would disagree on the obsidian as very important soldiers. I think they are the vanguard of an army, but they are not ever given any responsibility whatsoever.
True, true.
Um,
And I don't want to get like too much into the
yeah, no, I
details,
know.
because
But
things evolve and change throughout the series. Um, but then there are blues, who are like computer nerds. Basically, they fly ships, but they're basically computer nerds. Yellows are the doctors, or
And
is it green?
scientists.
Greens are the scientists. Violets are creators. Um, and we haven't really met all of these colors. So I don't know that we really need to go into every single one of them. Actually, I'm probably going to cut some of this out when I do the podcast because there's so many of them. And all we've met as of right now are reds. Obviously, Darrow is a red. We get brief mentions of the Obsidians. We meet Mateo, who is a pink. Mickey, who does the carving and is a violet. The gray, we meet a few grays by name because they are guards in Darrow's colony, but we don't really get many details about them beyond that. And then we meet a whole bunch of golds in part 2 of the book. So I just wanted to touch on the fact that there are these huge height differences in the society, and there's also these very specific castes where if you are this, you are assigned these handful of things. You don't necessarily just have to be a miner if you're a red. I mean, the women in Darrow's colony essentially farm silk, right? They're basically picking cotton, if the way it's kind of described. And there are, like I said, some high reds that live on the surface. So they can have more than one job, but they're all kind of relegated to a specific set of tasks. So Darrow also says in that passage that I think I just think we never try hard enough. We never take big risks because of the old men. And that's a huge part of the first couple chapters of the book. So I just wanted to talk about at the very beginning when Darrow is in his claw drill and there's a gas pocket and all the old dudes are like, no, don't do it, Darrow. And Darrow's like, fuck them, I'm doing it anyway. And he thinks that they're gonna win the laurel because of how much helium-3 he pulls, but all the old guys are grumbling and like, no, it's absolutely not happening. So do you think it's just age and experience that have made them I guess it's pretty obvious that it's got to be age and experience that have made them understand that no matter what they do, they are the
Not
lambdas
going to
are the
win.
dregs, right?
Yeah, and not going to win. I mean, this is interesting. Yes, I do think it's age and experience, but I also find it weird. I mean, I found this part of the society weird in that you have these groups of low reds who are miners who live in the mines and never actually leave the mines or essentially mines. And yet they're kept on almost starvation rations, which I understand they're trying to claim that there's shortages and that sort of thing. But on the other hand, I don't think that's since they need helium-3 and it's important, it doesn't seem like it's the most efficient way to get the helium-3 to keep your. I mean, you don't want to make them fat, dumb, and happy so they don't do any work. But I think it seemed to me that in this case, the society was not investing in their labor force quite as much as they should. And there's a fine line there, I understand, between.
Well, I mean, I think the
I don't know if that's
obvious
just an author thing that he just wanted to make it so bad and so horrible, but I tried to put it from the perspective of the people running the place. It just doesn't seem like an efficient way to run a mine.
I mean, I don't disagree, but I think the obvious explanation is it's basically slavery. It's basically slavery as it was, particularly in the Caribbean and the Americas,
But
in the 1800s, because that absolute the field workers were absolutely kept beaten down and not given hard they were given like what the basics that they needed to live, and that was it. And I agree, it's not a smart way to run things, but also you could even compare it to today's society in which only I mean, don't get me wrong, many of us have recognized for a long time that there's huge sections of workers that are underpaid. those mainly being like restaurant workers, food service workers, people who work at, grocery stores, the people who are necessary, right, to keep things running more so than so many of us are. And, of course, there's been this whole uh, nobody wants to work anymore thing for the past couple years, since COVID, really, because they're right. People don't want to work these shitty jobs for little to no pay, and they're clapping back. So I do think there is a comparison to be made there as well. The difference is we are at a point in our world and society where these people have, it's been recognized that they are essential, and they realize they're essential, and that they can ask for more money. They might not get it, as we're seeing now in our current, state of affairs, but they've realized that they can ask for it. So I think there's a couple different comparisons you can make, and I don't disagree that it seems like kind of silly for these super important workers to be underfed, but
Well,
also the Laurel thing.
yeah,
And
that's the part I don't understand. I don't understand why that would be rigged for the same group every time. I can understand someone keeping them hungry by offering the laurel, but it seems like you would that if I were the imperator who is in charge of the mine, you'd want it to be passed around, ideally to get everyone to work harder. Because as Darrow then realized after the fact, when he didn't win the laurel, and the old men were right, why take risks? Why go the extra mile to get more stuff if we're not going to be benefit from it? So, but if the laurel is changing hands rapidly, or at least occasionally, I think it's better for the efficiency of the whole operation. So, whatever. I think the author was trying to make a point about how miserable it is, but I think there.
well, and it's all, some of it is also, and actually this is another passage that I had highlighted, um kind of explains some of that. It's as the laurel wreath boxes come down to Gamma, I think about how clever it really is. They won't let us, the lambdas, win the laurel. They don't care that the math doesn't work. They don't care that the young scream and protest and the old moan their same tired wisdoms. This is just a demonstration of their power. It is their power. They decide the winner. A game of merit won by birth. It keeps the hierarchy in place. It keeps us striving, but never conspiring. Yet, despite the disappointment, some part of us doesn't blame the society. We blame Gamma, who receives the gifts. A man's only got so much hate, I suppose. And when he sees his children's ribs through their shirts, while his neighbors line their bellies with meat stews and sugared tarts, it's hard for him to hate anyone but them. You think they'd share, they don't. So I think that this is obviously a different world, a very different world than what we're living in now. But I do think that it's important to note the fact that by giving it to Gamma every time, they're creating a rivalry between these two clans so that they keep fighting. Because there's always going to be young ones like Darrow who hope that next time they'll be the ones that win the laurel. The old ones have given up, right? But they are too afraid of the consequences of fighting against it to do anything other than moan and groan. So the fact that the hierarchy is kept in place because there's always going to be young ones who think they can win it for the first time, right? But they hate the gammas so much that they're never going to work with them to change things. I mean, that's what's, I think, the most important point from this part of the book is the rivalry that is built between the clans, keeping them from doing anything different, basically, because the gammas aren't helping the lambdas, and the lambdas just keep trying. And because that's the other thing, the in the laurel passage, there are, I think it's Mu and Chi, maybe. There's two other clans that didn't meet their quotas, and Darrow makes a point of saying it's because they hit a gas pocket and like lost a whole bunch of their drillers or whatever, and they get their rations cut. So
Right.
like they're even worse off. So it's a very it's not a one-to-one comparison with how capitalism doesn't work in the United States, but it is Pierce Brown is definitely trying to make a point here about how keeping the low low keeps the middle class and keeps the rich super fucking rich. But onto the important stuff, I guess. I don't know, is this less important or more important? Because the building blocks of this society, the world building, there's a lot of it in the first two parts of this book, but there's also a whole bunch of story because we meet and are meant to fall in love with Io, seeing her through Darrow's eyes, even though personally she drives me a little bit crazy. And then we lose her, right? Like so quickly. But she's imperative to the story. She's imperative to his story. And I don't know. I've heard a lot of people really love Io. A lot of people are frustrated by her. I'm on the frustrated by her end because like I understand what she's saying, where she's coming from. She has really good points. But also, man, girl, you just did not handle any of this well.
Well, I mean, now I speculating on what we do and don't know. I mean, she sang this song knowing it was a death sentence. The question is, why? Is she just a stubborn hothead rebel? Or, and this is what I still have never figured out, did she know that Neral was with the sons of Ares and that this would get out? And therefore it was a sacrifice to be the martyr. And that she knew she was going to be a martyr as opposed to just becoming a martyr afterwards.
I think that she knew she was going to be a martyr either way, right? I do not I think she knew some things. I mean, she knew that the garden existed, right?
Right.
That there was a place with dirt and grass and animals and trees and a night sky, and they could see the sunrise. So she knows that they have the ability to terraform, and it doesn't sound like it's a small place either. She knows that they have the ability to terraform portions of the land. Now,
well, hold on. So the garden. Now I defend. She may or may not know what they can do or not. They basically terraformed a small cave.
yes.
All right. That's a little, and they already have atmosphere in said cave. Otherwise, the miners couldn't exist. So I wouldn't say that's like terraforming. It's you had a cave, you pumped oxygen into it. Because you could pump oxygen into it, and you have power, you can make light, and therefore you can grow things. I don't necessarily think that's terraforming per se, but
I mean, it is because nothing ever should have been able to grow in the Martian soil, period.
But I'm just saying, I don't think of it as knowing that the big terraforming success. I mean, they know how to terraform, otherwise they wouldn't be on Mars in the first place.
Right. Well, and I think the point that Io is making is when she brings Darrow there is they can do this. They have done it. It's to a small area, right? But she understands. Right. She understands that the Reds are the ones who made this happen. The Greys didn't do this, but they're the only ones who get to use it. That's not fair,
Right.
And I am totally 100% behind that. And I don't know that she knows about Uncle Neryl. I really don't think she does. Think that I think that she is a hot-headed young person who loves her husband but hates everything else about their lives because she is so stalwart in her belief that they are slaves. Darrow fights against it. He says, we're safer being on our knees. It's better that we're on our knees and we have food in our bellies, even if it's not the good food, I guess. But, what she says to him when they're in the garden, death isn't empty like you say it is. Emptiness is life without freedom, Darrow. Emptiness is living chained by fear of loss, of death. I say we break those chains. Break the chains of fear, and you break the chains that bind us to the goals, to the society. Could you imagine it? Mars could be ours. It could belong to the colonists who slaved here, died here, if you led the others to freedom. The things you could do, Darrow, the things you could make happen. I live for the dream that my children will be born free, that they will be what they like, that they will own the land their father gave them. I live for you, Darrow says sadly. And then she kisses his cheek and says, then you must live for more. And I think that passage just completely describes who she is. She has so much faith in and love for Darrow, but her love for him does not overcome her hatred for the society. That, I mean, I think it was the seeds of it were always there, right? Knowing that she had that I mean, shoot, we hear in part 2, read in part 2 that Uncle Neril, his daughter, I think like has an affair with a gamma to get meds that her husband needs, and then her husband finds out and kills the gamma, and like they all die or something. But it's I think it's like all these little bits and pieces that Darrow is ignoring because he is so blindly obsessed with Io. And she chose him, but I think she loved him, but I think Io chose Darrow because of this, because of the things she's saying, because she knows that he has it in him to be something greater. She loves him, but I'm not sure it's in the right way or for the right reasons. Is how I've always felt about her. And it's maddening that to me, I don't know what's more maddening. The idea that she sacrificed herself in the hopes that it would lead to him doing something more, or the fact that she might have known about it all and sacrificed like just gone as a willing lamb to the slaughter. And I really think it's the former, not the latter. But unless Pierce at some
Well,
point ever reveals the answer, which I honestly don't think he will, because I wouldn't if I was the author, we'll never know, and it will always be a point of contention.
well, if it was the latter, I don't consider it going like a lamb to the slaughter, because you it's more the wolf staring down the bear knowing it can't win than the lamb going to the slaughter. Um, I I don't know the answer either. I've always the plan, if it was the first one, then the hope that he would do something more. I mean, I don't know why you would think your death would cause him to do something more.
Yeah.
Because I just there was nothing in evidence at that point in the story to indicate that there was more there. He was he was a hothead, so it was far more likely he was going to get himself killed than doing anything successful. And she knew he was a hothead, so I that part of, so hence why I wondered if she knew the plan all along, and that was the plan with Neril and her, and who knows if she knew Dancer or not. I just
Yeah.
we haven't met quite yet, but we will within this discussion. So I've thought about that for a while, of whether she was in on it from the get-go and just decided to be the sacrificial lamb, but I wouldn't describe her as a sacrificial lamb.
Yeah, I think for
If
me,
that was the call.
it's a lot of rereads, and how I mean, her and Darrow are both hot-headed, right? And that's why I've always kind of leaned toward that she was just trying to make a point with her death. Um, and I don't there's something I really want to say, but I'm not going to. So because we'll have to get into it much, much, much later. I think it's in a later book, but ugh. Okay, so going into part two, where Darrow Io has died. You know, they received their lashings because they were caught coming out of the garden by the Greys, and or well, Darrow received his lashing, Io received some of hers, and he was worried she was going to die, and he was begging them to take, to let him take her lashes after a certain point, and they put a stone in his mouth and gagged him, right? Which is, you couldn't just gag him with the cloth or something, Jesus. But no, not, of course not in this society. So he watches her sing this song, and then she immediately gets hanged. And of course, the arch governor is here for this whole thing. That has always seemed a little bit, because he was there for the lashing, right? And they never said what their crime was, because they couldn't, because then they would have to admit that there's this garden that is secreted away for just the Greys, when the Reds are the ones who really created it, and or who did everything to help it be created. So they can't say what their crime was, and I get that they're trying to make uh they're trying to make an example out of Darrow because he's a hell diver, and even the most important among you aren't exempt from punishment when they do wrong, but they never say what they did wrong. And they also say, I think, that even the most important, Darrow, being a hell diver, and the most beautiful, Io, who's very beautiful as Reds go, apparently, aren't exempt from punishment. And it just seems like that's the thing. I guess if there were two questions I could ever ask Pierce, knowing he probably wouldn't answer the EO one, right? So I'm just gonna assume, if I asked, did EO know more than we think she did, he would not answer that. So I guess from this book, and possibly from this entire trilogy, the first three books of this saga, would be, why the hell was Nero, was the arch governor there at all?
Well, I thought he was there because didn't he start to suspect? I think he was there because it came out later that whoever the copper was who ran the mine was skimming, and I may have jumped the gun there, but
A little bit, yeah.
so as a result, I always just assumed he was there investigating, because why are we not getting as much helium out of here as we were expecting?
Yeah, maybe.
And that's why he was there, but just doing an inspection, trying to figure out what's going on, because they mentioned in the story that's essentially the source of his wealth, is the helium-3 mines. So it makes sense that he would go to the helium-3 mines.
Yeah. I mean, I think
what's going wrong in some of them. When
I mean, the skimming thing is a future thing, but it's not like a huge spoiler, I guess. To be honest, I don't remember. It's been several years since I read these. This is going to be fun to edit as a podcast when I try to decide what I take out and what I leave in. So anyway, so Darrow I'm thinking Neril and Darrow because I'm looking at the document and he's talking
Nero
about his
is
uncle.
Nero is the arch governor.
Yeah, but I'm looking at our document and Darrow. I'm looking at a passage where Darrow's talking about his uncle. So I'm seeing
Oh,
Neril
Nero.
and
Okay.
Darrow. Like I'm saying Daryl. We're not doing The Walking Dead here. But so Darrow, knowing that it's his own death sentence, sneaks out of his house and goes to pull Io down and bury her against, all the rules, whatever. And it's a very quick thing, right? Like he pulls down her body, he brings her up to the garden, buries her in the garden, comes back down, is like immediately, the next thing we know, he's being he's going to be hanged. And he already uh when he was pulling Io's body down, his uncle gave him a drink from a flask, right? And when I first read this book, I read it so quickly that I didn't recognize that Darrow was after he drank from his uncle's flask, it was like a progression of very brief mentions, but very clearly mentioned quite a few times, that I feel drunk, I feel slow, everything feels heavy. And then at the end, before he even gets hanged, he's having trouble breathing. So on reread, it was like, oh God, of course Neril gave him something. But the first time I read it, I was reading so fast, I glossed over all of that. And I just think it was really interesting that if you're not really paying attention, or if you're just, I don't know, listening to it while you're driving, if it's an audiobook, or in my case, reading it really quickly because you're super into it, you would very likely miss even that number of little cues that were given that Darrow drank
Yeah,
something
but it
to.
also indicates that because of the timing of it, that Nero giving it to him, Nero was also probably the one who turned Darrow in.
Oh, no. That's explained. There's security cameras everywhere. Darrow
Okay.
knew that he was going to get caught. The only reason Neril doesn't get caught when he takes Darrow down is because he has connections in the Sons of Ares
Right.
and he knows how to turn off the security cameras. So Darrow
Right,
gets.
but if the security cameras were off, then wouldn't that have theoretically? Oh, I guess the security cameras up in
Yeah,
the
they were still
glade
on.
too. Yeah, in the glade.
Yeah,
Okay.
because Neril didn't. It's like he knew that Darrow was going to do it. Also, Neril and Darrow, that's driving me crazy. Neril knew Darrow was going to do what he did, but I I think he knew how to turn those cameras off, but he didn't do it on purpose. Right? He could have. He knew Darrow was going to do this. He straight up said he knew Darrow was going to do this, but he didn't turn those cameras off because he needed Darrow to be hanged. Like he needed that to happen in order to deliver him to the Sons of Ares. Now, what is more interesting, I think, is that while Darrow is pulling Io down and everything, is the HC is quote unquote malfunctioning for the first time ever in its history. And it's, it's obviously hackers, right? I think anybody reading it would recognize that somebody's messing with stuff in the background. We we find out later for sure that that's what it was, but the way that it just keeps replaying Io's death and like her song, like it's the song, and then it's her shouting "break the chains." They don't show the little bits and pieces. They show the parts that are going to make her the martyr that they need her to be, the Persephone that they need her to be. And so Darrow, he gets hanged. Darrow gets hanged and wakes up in a grave. That part I thought was weird. Why did Nero really need to bury him? Like, I feel like he hid him in an old tunnel that nobody uses anymore. What was the necessity of actually putting him in the ground other than some sort of weird, like, Christ, uh, thing that we're trying to do here, but because he puts him in a tunnel that nobody uses anymore. He wouldn't have been found there, not before Harmony, not before he woke up and Harmony literally was immediately there for him as soon as they knew the timing. But so he wakes up, kind of digs himself out of his little shallow grave, and Harmony is immediately there to truck him off, literally, and bring him to Dancer. And Darrow knows who they are immediately. He knows who they are, but they've been like I said in the summary, the HC is like the Fox News of the society, right?
Yeah.
So they've always heard the Sons of Ares are just like militant, like terrorist bombers who are murdering mining colonies and stuff for no reason. Blah, blah, blah. So it's interesting that he immediately knows who's doing this, and he's not with them, but he's also not necessarily against them right away. He's just kind of like, what are you going to do for me? So what were your thoughts on Darrow's first meeting with Harmony and Dancer?
I mean, I'll be honest. I didn't really think much. To me, it was just the next stage in the plot, and that part of it I never really did a lot of thought about what Darrow's feelings were at the time. First, it was confusion, then anger when he found when he found out that there was a real whole world out there that he had been denied. But as far as to me, that part of it just went. That was just move on to the next plot point. I didn't really never consider it.
Well, so one of the first conversation, or early on in Darrow's conversation with Dancer, sorry, I'm still coughing from allergies or something. Early on in Darrow's conversation with Dancer tells him about how Uncle Neril works for them, essentially. But the way Dancer is talking about Neril, Darrow says, "You act like my uncle bloody damn owed you." Dancer says he owes his people. People. And Darrow laughs at this. There's family, there is clan, there may even be township and mine, but people? And you act as though you're my representative, as though you have a right to my life. But you are just a fool. All you Sons of Ares. My voice is withering in its condescension. Fools who can do nothing but blow things up, like children kicking pit viper nests in rage. And, he has a point, because that's all he knows, right? Honestly, I know Nick isn't here tonight, but one of the things Nick said when he first started reading this book was, I didn't know I was going to be reading about real life things that are happening. And the funny thing is, Red Rising was published in, I believe, 2014. Hold on, I'm double checking. Yes, 2014. So Red Rising was published in 2014. So this is a long time ago-ish. To me, it's
8 years I don't consider a long time, but that's okay.
To me, it's a long time only because my life has taken so many crazy turns since then. But so Red Rising was published in 2014. And not to say that Pierce absolutely didn't take his cues and a lot of what he wrote from history, but it's been really weird actually to start rereading this now after everything that has happened in the past couple of years. And I'm brought back to the protests that were happening in 2020, the Black Lives Matter protests. And of course, from my point of view, I'm not really seeing people do anything wrong. They're just protesting the fact that they're protesting rightfully, right? But it's being described on a lot of news channels, including, Fox News, aka the same thing as the Society's HC, that they're violent protesters and they're causing all these problems, they're looting, etc. And then you find out later that it's actually not them that is doing any of that at all. That some of it was fake, entirely fake, and some of it was actually like super right wing people who were instigating things. But it's been really weird rereading this and realizing the actual current time comparisons. And I agree with Darrow, right? If you're only seeing one version of things, in this case, the Sons of Ares are just a bunch of assholes bombing, innocent miners, then of course you're going to think that they're a bunch of fools that just blow things up. But then Dancer takes him to the surface, or really way above the surface, and shows him how things really are. And it's just, I mean, Darrow immediately is like, "Ah, fuck this. Yeah, I'll do whatever you want me to do," because he realizes that not just that they've been lied to, but also how much EO was right, etc. So it's it's a really quick but well written turning point, in my opinion. Like, this could have been done in so many different ways, I suppose, but Pierce Brown he doesn't take time, right? He just said, we see Darrow seeing how it is, and he's like, nope, done. I'm with you. I'm with you. Forget everything I said about you guys just being bombers blowing things up. And I think it was a really well done, quickly without dragging things out, I guess.
Fair enough.
So I'm trying to think what would be and part of that is another passage is, it's kind of a bit of a rehash of some things Darrow has said before or thought before. How clever of them. How much hate they create between people who should be kin. But if the clans knew what luxury exists on the surface, if they knew how much had been stolen from them, they would feel the hatred I feel. They would unite. And he knows that if it was just Reds, united, like finding out about this and rising up, uniting and rising up, that it would be a hot-blooded, quick thing that was immediately put down. So he agrees to what they're doing, which the carving is something that I have learned over my years of I kind of lurk on the Red Rising subreddit. I've listened to a couple of podcasts. Howler Pod and Hail Reaper are the only two podcasts that are totally Red Rising, as far as I have found. And, or at least, I mean, as far as I have found, Howler Pod was the first one, and Hail Reaper is the second one. So having read a bunch of stuff on Reddit and having listened to those two podcasts, it's very interesting to me that there's a lot of mixed opinions about the carving chapters, which is a big part of part 2 of this book, right? We learn it. I personally feel like it was necessary, but I guess a lot of people think it's slow. I think that Pierce Brown does a lot of scientific stuff really well in these books, or technological stuff really well in these books, but the carving was one of the things where how the heck is somebody ever gonna survive this? How the heck did you make somebody's bones denser? I do feel like there's a lot of questionable.
Well, I mean, look, as someone who's a Marvel superhero fan, essentially the carving was Steve Rogers, Captain America, and the Super Soldier Serum. I mean, it's essentially the same thing. That's how I viewed it. I mean, it's a bunch of steroids they loaded him with. And then a combination of, if we make these bones denser, they took Wolverine and they gave him an adamantium skeleton. You just go with the flow. It's not, it's you assume they have the technology, and they said that this was really experimental, and a bunch of people died because of it. The same is true with the super soldier serum. It's just something. It's a convenient plot device that it doesn't matter. There are things that when I just think they're so preposterous as it will never happen, I get upset. But in this, they've already talked about carving in other things and making genetically engineered creatures
Mm.
and creating these different mythological creatures.
Or what are they? The
The
spider
griffins,
things, the spider things that make the silk. Yeah.
right? And griffins later on. Is, again, I'm jumping the gun a bit, but they mentioned earlier that there's carving and that they make these animals. So this is just it's consistent with the universe, and it was fine.
Oh, I mean, I was never thinking like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. No, I don't want it. Let me be very clear. It just, in terms of how Pierce Brown describes a lot of the science and technology, I felt like this was one of the weaker things. And that said, though, this is also the first book. So that could also just be a writer growing and learning, etc. But the other thing is I really want whatever Darrow was whatever he had that helped him just learn like thousands of years, because he was a completely uneducated person. He didn't even know how to read, right? And he learned thousands of years of history and math and science and literature in, a couple months. Like that's what I want.
Well, I mean, again, it's not that wasn't genetic engineering, but that was basically didn't they gave him an implant of some kind so that he could take in this information into his brain. I mean, again, I must admit I want that chip in real life.
Hmm.
I would love to have it, but I think I'm going to be unfortunately at least one generation too late.
Yeah, no, same probably.
My daughter's children maybe will get the chip.
But yeah, no, not arguing at all with the technology of that existing or whatever. I just want it. That's all. And I want to be able to retain that knowledge, because that's the other thing. Like I can read a book and 2 years later I remember at best the basic plot points and maybe some character names if I'm lucky, if I've only read it once, right? So lucky you, Darrow. Minus all the pain and heartache and everything that you're going through. Lucky you. But then he also gets trained in speech and etiquette and dance by Mickey, a pink, and
No, by
Mickey.
Mateo.
Sorry, by Mateo. Sorry, by Mateo. Thank you. Yeah. So he gets trained by etiquette or in etiquette and speech and dance by Mateo, a pink, and at some point he's dancing so well that Mateo questions him because he learned how to dance from his uncle Neril. And or well, he might have learned some things from his father prior to the forbidden dance that Uncle Neril taught him, but there are dances that Mateo is teaching him that are at least reminiscent of the ones that he learned in the mines, which is very interesting to me because that means that most likely the Golds have taken their dancing cues from the Reds, which is a little bit cultural appropriation, probably. But
Well,
Mateo,
I was actually thinking I thought of that totally differently. I just assumed it was before the colors. I just think it's how the dancing has evolved from reds versus golds from before there were colors,
perhaps,
and the difference and they're related but they're different. That's how I saw it. But
perhaps, but it does. I think
big,
the thing that got me was that Mateo freaks out and is like, who are you actually? And the important part really from that section is that Darrow says, this is who I am. I do not lie to low colors. And that is something that we will absolutely circle back on later, much, much later in the series. But it was important that he was so good at the dancing, he didn't even really need to be taught. And that is what made Mateo question whether or not he was a red who had been carved into a gold.
Yeah.
So, another thing that after he has gone through the carving, after he has been learning all these things, Dancer explains to Darrow how dangerous it is, right? I mean, he knew it was dangerous from the beginning, but Darrow is taking things kind of lightly, and Dancer's like, dude, they will torture the fuck out of you. They will pull you apart piece by piece if they figure out that you're not actually a gold somehow. And Darrow says, it doesn't matter if they find me out. They've taken what they can from me already. That is why I'm a weapon you can use, because he's thinking of Io, right? He's thinking of it might have been a lie, the life that he lived in the mines, but he is still so attached to that lie and that life and that wife. um, but this is a quote that is oft quoted from Dancer. He says, wrong. You're of use because you're more than a weapon. When your wife died, she didn't just give you a vendetta. She gave you her dream. You're its keeper, its maker. So don't be spitting anger and hate. You're not fighting against them, no matter what Harmony says. You're fighting for Io's dream, for your family that is still alive, your people. And I think that's a really important moment in Darrow's character growth, because one of the things I made sure to kind of just slightly insert in the summary is that he is a cocksure little asshole as a hell diver, right? And then he learns that his whole life is a lie, but he's still really just super sure of himself. And I think it's important that he understand the gravity of the whole situation. And I think that it's Dancer telling him this that allows him to understand that, or at least partially allows him to understand that.
Yeah, I'm not sure he. No, I'm jumping the gun. I was gonna say I'm not sure he actually has grown out of it yet, but
Oh no, he hasn't grown out of it. No. I'm just saying this is part of what leads Darrow to understand that he needs to be more than just an angry, revenge seeking, vengeance seeking machine, basically. So I'm trying to think, like, so then Darrow takes Darrow takes the test, right? He takes the test to go into the institute, and it's kind of funny because there's a girl that's sitting next to him that's like tapping a stylus and annoying the shit out of him. So he steals her stylus, and several people see him do it, including the proctor, the person who's administering the test. And the proctor is like, kind of, knowingly, oh, yeah, I saw what you did. Good job. He doesn't say that, but that's the whole thing. And one of the other students or prospective students calls him a cutter or something like that, basically saying, like, you're overstepping your bounds or whatever. But then Cassius comes in and they have their little meet cute, which is mostly just Cassius being like, Oh yeah, yeah, you're clearly a smart dude. Saw what you did there. And Darrow is just like, I don't want anything to do with this guy. He's nice enough, I guess, but he's a gold. And um it's a very interesting exchange between the two of them. First exchange, because to be honest, I'd kind of forgotten that happened, and I thought that they didn't meet until after Darrow meets Julian, who's Cassius's brother. But no, they meet at the testing center, and Cassius is like, "Oh, come party with me," and Darrow's like, "Nah, I got shit to do,"
Right.
which was, and Cassius is like, "Oh, right," because he's a low. He's not an important gold, whatever. He doesn't have money. But I thought that the testing thing is really interesting, particularly when compared to the fact that they actually go back and have to get tested. They actually go through another test when they after they've already been accepted into the institute, but I'll get into that in a minute. But Darrow does so well on the test that they call the Bureau of Quality or Board of Quality Control on
To
him.
see if he cheated, yeah.
Right,
He
right.
was too good. Didn't they say he like didn't miss a question or he missed one question or something?
I think he missed one. Yeah. I think he missed one out of hundreds. And I mean, the thing is, the education that he received, if that exists, do not they all go through that? Because
Maybe it's considered improper, right? I mean, that would be cheating. And there are enough people who cheat as it is in this world, but
I think that would be a good question.
or again, it may be so dangerous to do it
Yeah.
because there
Well,
may
I
be.
mean, the carving, the physical carving, yes, but the
Well, but we don't know. I mean,
knowledge?
well, it could be. I mean, who knows? It could fry the brain on 20% of the people or something. We don't know. It again, you just sort of go with it. Yes, they had this chip. Yes, it helped him push him up, or maybe everyone does do it, and it just, but not everyone because of the way their bodies work. Not everyone retains it as perfectly as he happened to.
Well,
You just
and
they
it's
may
also
all have the same chip and they go through the same learning, but just like I can go through the same class you do and read the same books you do, but you may retain it better than I do.
well, and it's also not just like basic knowledge retention, right? One of the things that is mentioned quite a few times is his ability to extrapolate.
Right, strategy and
So
problem solving.
so not everybody has that. Like, I'll be completely honest, the LSAT is a lot of extrapolation. It's really not at all about knowledge of law, specific laws, etc. Because that's stuff you learn in law school. It's a fuck ton of extrapolation. I did super well on the LSAT because I'm good at that. Now, am I necessarily good at retaining all the facts that would, if I had actually gone to law school like I was supposed to and not been like, actually, I decided I don't want to do all this work. Would I actually have retained all that knowledge and been able to pass the bar and be a lawyer? I mean, like, probably, but I don't think I would have done as well on the bar as I did on the LSAT. I did really well on the LSAT because I'm good at that stuff. And I do think that a big part of that is that's how Darrow's brain works. And that's clearly not how everybody's brain works, including Julian, because while we don't know this right away, we do find out later that he struggled to get into the institute but wanted to be there with his brother. And I think the wanting to be there with his brother is very clear in part
Okay,
two.
so I this may be again jumping the gun, but I thought somewhere, and again, maybe so we're going to talk about the passage where it's a culling, but I thought someone mentioned somewhere that the institute takes the best and worst students, and that's how they cull the absolute worst from gold. So like the average people are the bronzies who we talk about later, but and the people, the golds who don't go to the institute, and the institute basically takes the best and the dregs, and then
I
that's
don't
how,
know.
that was my interpretation of what was happening. And Julian, people were worried that Cash, the Julian
I don't know
might
that
have
it's
been
the
on the
best and the
dregs.
worst. I think that it's they take the best, but then they also take like people like Julian who very possibly had parents who would buy their way in. Um I don't want to get too much into that
I'll try to find it later,
because
but
it comes up later for sure. But what they do is when they go through the passage is they pair somebody who they think is somebody who they think needs to be called, in this case Julian, with somebody who will absolutely be able to kill them, in this case Darrow. And I don't want to go beyond Darrow and Julian because I don't want to talk about who else gets paired with
yeah,
who.
I want to talk about that later because again, there's a spoiler
Yeah, exactly,
there.
exactly.
But
But so Darrow goes through the test. He passes it with flying colors. He gets questioned by the board because he passed it with like 2 flying colors. And he gets to the institute and he has to sit there and listen to Nero, the arch governor, who was there when his wife died, and blames Eo's death on Nero, which, to be honest, listen, it is not Nero's singular fault, right? It's the entire society. It's the society as a whole. All of it's bad. And but Darrow has this specific obsession with Nero because he was there at the time. But Nero says society has 3 stages: savagery, ascendance, decadence. The great rise because of savagery. They rule in ascendance. They fall because of their own decadence. And he's in this particular passage, he's talking about the savagery that the people who settled Luna, who settled the moon, had to exert on Earth because Earth was taxing the shit out of them. And they're like, ha ha ha, fuck you. We're just going to kill you all. And then they rule in ascendance and they fall because of their own decadence. And in the decadence thing, he's talking about the pixies, which when Darrow first sees the city, he sees a pixie, right? The first gold he sees in the city is a dude flying around on grab boots or something, and he's got bottles of wine in his hand, and he's laughing and drinking, and he's meeting up with all these girls, and these are a bunch of pixies, right? That's like, we don't know that at the time, but now we know that. And then Nero says Darrow says that Nero tells them how the Persians were felled, how the Romans collapsed because their rulers forgot how their parents gained them an empire. He prattles about Muslim dynasties and European effeminacy and Chinese regionalism and American self loathing and self neutering. All the ancient names. So he's bringing up all these societies who either have already fallen or in this, far future society will eventually. And it's very interesting that they have, you know they have specific examples in their current society of the savagery, ascendance, decadence, but he's telling them about the history of it because he wants to drive home the point that our society could die at any time if it falls into any one of these pits, right?
right.
So that's why the institute exists, is to keep the iron golds on top. And that is a term that is used in the first 2 parts of this book. I did make sure of that. So it keeps the iron golds on top. But then and this is where what I mentioned earlier, they have to go through an additional test after they've already been accepted to the institute, right? They still have another test to go through. And I just want to read this passage because I was laughing about it, and I read it to Dean, and we were talking about how it's very similar to uh some tests, or a test in Ender's Game. But Darrow says, "The test is quick, and it is in the form of an immersion game. There's a goblet on a hill that I need to acquire. Many obstacles stand in my way. I pass them as rationally as possible, trying to hide my anger when a little elf steals the key or steals a key I acquire. But every step of the way, there's some setback, some inconvenience, and it is always unforeseen. It is always something beyond the bounds of extrapolation. In the end, I reach the goblet, but only after killing an annoying wizard and cruelly enslaving the race of elves by means of said wizard's magic wand. I could have left the elves be, but they annoyed me." And honestly, I just I read that, and as much as I'm like, "Yay," like, it is kind of a, vague reference to Ender's Game, but also the whole thing at the end, "I could have left the elves be, but they annoyed me," was very much like, "Oh god, Daryl, I feel you." Like, I feel you so much. Um, but that is I think that test is part of how he ends up in House Mars, right? Because they see that he has this sort of almost vicious streak in him that he didn't have to win at this game.
Well, I think he ended up in House Mars because Fitchner was the proctor of House. Oh, again, I'm jumping the gun. So
Yes. Yeah, and I had to delete that from the podcast.
sorry about that.
No, it's okay. No, I mean,
Yeah,
but the thing is, like, so Fitchner is the proctor of House. Fitchner is the proctor, but the Praetors are there, and they are the ones who like they can stop you from getting because I believe it was I think it was House Mercury maybe. I can't
yeah.
remember
Lauren
exactly.
Lauren wanted him, but the other proctors didn't, or something like
Yes,
that.
exactly, exactly. So it's very important that the proctor has a say, but he cannot make the decision. Oh no, Lauren is House Mars as well, I believe. But
No, no. Lauren was a different house.
hold on, let me look that up. I could have sworn he was. Oh no, yeah, he was.
He's from Mars. He's from the planet Mars originally, I think. But
Hold on, I'm trying to find it because I could have sworn he had a House Mars ring on his thing. Yeah, yes, he's a drafter for House Mars. Yeah.
Lauren was?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, it was the proctor of House Mercury, the little kind of flighty one who wanted Darrow, and the Praetors passed him over.
Okay. So
But
my mistake.
it's all good. But yeah, so it's very interesting to me that Darrow he could have done this test differently because to be honest, I'm thinking like I don't want to say too much about it now, but having just reread these parts of the book, I'm thinking like, so how did others take this test, and how did that affect where they were placed? Like, how would have characters who we know a lot about later? I mean, Cassius even, but like Mustang, who goes into a different house, who we only meet super briefly in the first two parts of this book, and I don't even think she's not even given a name, right? Um, so yeah, that's definitely something I want to talk about in future episodes. But any last thoughts on parts 1 and 2 of this book, like on everything that Darrow went through when he was still a red, his carving, his experience applying to and getting into the institute, on the passage? Because I guess we didn't talk about the passage at all, but to me it's very self-explanatory. Like, he gets pulled from his, he's thinking, oh god, these like lazy ass golds, like we're just going to college, basically we're going to party like frat boys, and then he gets pulled from his bed and beaten and shoved in a room with one other person, and they're told only one of us can come out alive, and poor Julian is just like, I need this, dude. I need this. I can't not be in the Institute. And Darrow is like, nah, man, you don't understand. Like, I can't just walk away from this. You have to kill me, and I'm not going to let you kill me. And everything would be different if Darrow hadn't been paired with Julian, but because he was, it was super sad because when he met Julian, it was like this recognition that there are golds out there who are good, right? Who are kind. And he immediately had to murder this kid.
Yeah, I mean, and it was interesting that he figured it out much quicker because he was quite honestly not good.
Well, because Julian didn't have that streak in him, right?
Right. Well, that's what I said. Darrow is not pure
No,
as the driven snow.
no, he's not. I mean, rightfully so, but no, he's not. And we're just kind of left at the end of part 2 where Darrow is just crazy. Like, he hates that he had to do this, right? He hates it, but he still murdered this kid.
Right.
And that is where we're left. And so any last thoughts before we close out?
No, not tonight.
All right, well, I usually close out with a quote, but I've read so many of them. I think what I want to read is this sounds like a Passover quote, but I think it is very important and I want to remember it for future episodes. Mateo shines my shoes in my room. Of course, there are machines for doing these things, but an Oriot would never use a machine for something a person could do. There is no power in that. And as we close out this episode, I just want to give a shout out to our Heroes Tier patron, Tommy of the TKOK Podcast Network. Thank you so much for supporting us. Once again, I'm Tara, along with fellow host Jonathan. Don't forget, you can always hit us up at Sagas and Sass on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, or email us at sagasandsass@gmail.com with any comments or thoughts you might have. Thank you for joining us for Sagas and Sass. We'll be back on Wednesday, October 5th to cover part 3 of Red Rising, which is just called Gold. Have a good night. Bye.
Bye.